there'll be some time for some questions of Gayle. We're going to have two faculty members respond. We're going to introduce both of them right now, and then they'll come one after another. This is two faculty members at Westmont that I really enjoyed working with. First, Dr. Rick Pointer will be coming. Rick is the Fletcher Jones Foundation Endowed Chair in History at Westmont. He was my predecessor at Provost at Westmont as well, and I've been really grateful to Rick for the ways in which he has done everything he can to make my transition an effective one, left me outstanding instructions and notes. And then, of course, he went off to Europe, where he led a semester program, which he has done a few times for Westmont because he has a deep interest in international history and international study. He'll be followed by Eileen McMahon, who is the vice chair of the faculty. That is the highest elected position in the faculty. She serves also as chair of the biology department. She is someone who has a real interest in immunology, has done some research on multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis, and she's been a delight to work with as well on the faculty. I appreciate Eileen as someone who can ask the tough questions, but has a can-do spirit and builds a great sense of team in the faculty council. So let's first start with Dr. Pointer, and then Dr. McMahon-McQuaid.
Well, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Dr. Beebe, for your very wise and insightful reflections. We've definitely heard the voice of experience here this evening, and from someone I can testify puts the principles he's been identifying in practice every day. On the other hand, I think Eileen and I are feeling woefully underqualified to offer anything more or different from what Gayle has already shared. In fact, I came across something in the paper last week that captures well what he actually may be thinking after he hears the two of us speak tonight. So if you'll just bear with me while I put up this little cartoon. Can you see this, Gayle? You can see this. So it's, let's just imagine Gayle saying, today I learned that the secret of good managing is hiring people who are smarter than I am. He's looking at Eileen and me. And the next slide is, maybe I'll try that next time. And then they walk off looking just a little bit sheepish about I'm tempted to just stop right there, but I'll leave that up and just make a few brief remarks, less in response to Gayle directly and more as reflections on my own time in a certain kind of leadership. As Mark just mentioned, from August of 2009 to February of 2012, I had the privilege of serving as Westmont's interim provost and dean of the faculty. And for those of you who maybe are less familiar with academia, the provost position is basically one that encompasses many things, but your primary role is to provide leadership to the academic program and the faculty. What that means in layman terms is that I basically tried to herd cats for 2.5 years. I suspect that most, if not all, provosts would say that their task is more art than science, so it's some of both. Personally, I come to that role after 28 years as a faculty person at Westmont and other colleges, and in some ways that experience helped prepare me for what my new responsibilities were. In other ways, they didn't give me a clue. Every day in the job confirmed the truth that you don't know what you don't know. In other words, there's no substitute for actual experience in the position. I recall during my first few weeks in the job feeling as though I had just gone from being Joe Schmo faculty person, whose opinions about this or that you can put out there pretty freely and people may or may not pay any attention to them, to the next day having to, in many ways, be a sort of Solomon-like character, making decisions that had real impact on the lives, families, and careers of colleagues and students alike. Looking back on that experience as a whole now, there's a great deal that I wish I had known before starting that journey. But in particular, I think there were at least two qualities or characteristics of an effective leader that I underestimated or simply didn't realize were so important until well into my time as provost. And so, very briefly, I want to highlight those two qualities, which I think very much reinforce or dovetail what the President has highlighted tonight and what I anticipate General Powell telling us next week. The first of those qualities has to do with a leader's need for both tremendous emotional energy and a great deal of emotional intelligence, and Gayle has spoken directly to the second of those. I'm not sure whether to think of those qualities as more a matter of character or more a matter of competence. Perhaps they're a combination of the two. What I am sure of is that good leadership demands a large reservoir of emotional energy, one that exceeds even the enormous physical energy that it takes to work the very long hours that most management positions require. By emotional energy, I mean the capacity to keep being your best self amid the inevitably taxing, wearying, irritating, and frustrating demands of the job, where the temptations to stop caring, or to be less than kind, or to make snap judgments, or to be dismissive are so great that all of us succumb to them at least once in a while. I certainly did, and more than once in a while. Effective leadership requires a leader to succumb less often. Doing so requires a great deal of emotional energy and stamina. Effective leadership also requires high emotional intelligence, that capacity to read and understand well the emotions of others as well as your own. Now, I know that there's an ongoing scholarly and even popular debate about whether there is such a thing as emotional intelligence, and if there is, whether it's something we're born with rather than something we can actually develop. Wherever you come out on that debate, my point is simply to say that effective leadership entails an ability to navigate conversations and relationships with sensitivity, to calculate without becoming perniciously calculating, to manage people and situations without becoming manipulative, and to interpret accurately others' feelings as well as your own. Presidents of colleges and businesses need that type of intelligence. Presidents of the United States need it even more. And make that same point about the second quality or characteristic of leadership that I want to mention, and its relationship to one's level of responsibility. That is, the more responsibility one carries, the more one needs this particular quality, and the quality I have in mind is what I'll simply call moral courage. Now, integrity and other elements of strong character are necessary for all members of an organization, or all employees of a business or college. But the reality is that the weightiness of the moral choices one faces in the workplace tends to increase exponentially, I would argue, with increases in the scope of one's responsibility. So to face those effectively, a leader needs enormous moral courage. A courage to confront difficult problems or personnel, very much what Dr. McKenna has talked about. A courage to make unpopular decisions and to stick with them if you continue to think you are right. A courage to admit when you've made mistakes and shoulder the blame for them. A courage to act with moral consistency regardless of how much you like or dislike those involved, and regardless of how much it impacts an organization's bottom line or the other ways we evaluate success in an organization. A courage to withstand the pressures to compromise your moral convictions for the sake of expediency, convenience, or personal gain. A courage to keep getting up each morning to face whatever old or new challenges the day might hold. A courage to worry less about being a leader and more about developing leadership in others. Cultivating a generation of leaders with that type of courage would go a long way towards ensuring a bright future for our society and for our world. And I think on our best days, that's some of what we're trying to do at Westmont. Emotional intelligence and energy and moral courage, those are some of the qualities that every effective leader needs. I certainly needed them as provost. I certainly saw them in President Beebe. So many thanks, Gayle, for your wonderful leadership of our college and for your wise remarks tonight. Thank you.
Well, it is a real honor to be included in this illustrious group here and to be with you tonight. I have worked as vice chair. I've gotten to meet regularly with Dr. Beebe the last academic year, and I will say I've come to really admire his leadership style and the wisdom and integrity he brings to his position. So it really is wonderful to be in this dialogue with him, with my dear colleague, Dr. Pointer, and with all of you. So I look forward to our conversation later. So in my remarks, I am going to take the 180 point of view. I'm going to examine the flipped side of the coin, if you will. Now, no one ever writes a book entitled The Shaping of an Effective Follower. It doesn't have the same ring. Perhaps it's not as inspirational, no doubt. But as I read Dr. Beebe's book, and most of my remarks sort of come straight from his book, it emphasizes the critical role of a leader in motivating and encouraging his or her employees. And that so much of good leadership is about maximizing their experience and their productivity. Plus, while none of us have, many of us haven't been in leadership roles, many of us will be and just haven't yet. I've certainly never been provost or president. We have all served under leaders, and their leadership has had a profound influence on our own experiences and possibly even our own careers. Now, indeed, we all started at the bottom, didn't we? This is a great unifying principle. And actually, just entertain me a moment. I mean, think right now about the very first job you had. Picture that in your mind. Usually these aren't very glorious positions. Now think about your first manager, your first supervisor. Maybe you can't remember a lot of specific things about it. So I, at age 16, was a cashier at Service Merchandise. Probably many of you don't even know what that is. It's a catalog showroom. It's bankrupt now. But I remember my boss being friendly and welcoming and encouraging, and he clear expectations, and that meant so much for the 16-year-old self. And in the end, we all know what it means to serve under an effective leader, because either we have served under an effective leader and we can look at their example, or we haven't. And sometimes it's the contrast that we see, that we learn from. So in Dr. Beebe's book and in his remarks, he emphasizes that it's the human resources that remain the most important resource in an organization. A leader cannot succeed without the help of others, right? With the people working underneath him or her employees. Indeed, he says the heart of any organization is its people, and that is the primary factor that determines an organization's success or its failure. And he also notes that the dominant worker today is what he called the knowledge worker, what's been called the knowledge worker. And this is a very different animal than the more task-oriented workers in the past. So who are these knowledge workers, and why do they need to be managed quite differently? So first of all, these knowledge workers are more portable, right? They need to grow and develop, or they will quickly jump ship. They're very team-oriented, and they are used to a flattened hierarchy because their best performance comes when they are viewed as partners. They're very relational, and they put a high value on their interactions with those that they work with. So is this you? This is me. I'm just sort of, as a professor, a quintessential knowledge worker. But it's these characteristics of a workplace that I think, yeah, these are pretty great. And why is that? Because it so resoundingly affirms the valued contribution of each individual and helps place their contribution in the context of the whole, and it gives them a greater mission for the organization. So I want to focus my remaining remarks on two aspects of this relational quality of the knowledge worker, and perhaps the challenges that it can bring. So first of all knowledge workers want to belong. Indeed, this is a fundamental aspect of human nature, I think. And in the past, our sense of belonging predominantly came from family, maybe our place of birth, ethnic group we come from, our faith. And these are still important, but increasingly our work is coming to identify a lot about who we are. It's becoming a big part of our identity. So what happens when at face value you don't fit in as well with the dominant institutional culture? What happens when you're a woman in a largely male-dominated institution We can think maybe in the US, computer science or physics, those sort of classic examples from science. What if you're a man in a largely female-dominated organization, nursing perhaps, or certain nonprofits? What happens when you are not white in a largely white institution, like sadly so much of higher ed still is? Immediately, the worker's sense of belonging is challenged, right? And indeed, it's the responsibility of a leader to cultivate a culture where every person, and Dr. Beebe certainly emphasized this, where every person is valued for the strengths they bring. And sometimes the strengths are linked to the diverse experiences that they had and their different perspectives they can bring. So Dr. Beebe in his book says, and I love this quote, because it's so straightforward, integrating individuals from diverse backgrounds will require deliberate and consistent effort. Deliberate and consistent. And this is very, very true. This is because more often than not, we are more naturally inclined and are drawn into relationships with others who are like us, who have shared similar experiences. It's just easier to have conversations because you have more in common. And this includes leaders and workers alike. I mean, leaders, I think, sometimes can be drawn to workers that have had similar experiences, and workers to their colleagues for the same reasons. But ultimately, this can be pretty destructive, because it can lead to situations where others are excluded, sort of the minority ends up getting excluded, undermining, of course, their ability to contribute to the whole. So in our last meeting, I actually shared with Dr. Beebe about a discussion we were having in my genetics class. And it was about the discovery of the DNA structure, the structure of DNA. And at the center of the story, if you don't know it, is 3 male scientists, right? Maybe you recognize these names. James Watson, right? Francis Crick, maybe a little less known, Maurice Wilkins, and one woman, Rosalind Franklin. And immediately, right, you can say, well, one of these things is not like the other. And indeed, from historical accounts and even firsthand interviews, you could just get the sense that Rosalind Franklin was largely excluded from a lot of the collaboration, a lot of the camaraderie that the other men shared together. And ultimately, she was the technical whiz. I mean, she was really wonderful at this technique called X-ray diffraction, which allows you to get a picture of the atoms in a structure and their relative positions to each other. And ultimately, she took the famous photo 51. Sounds really conspiratorial already, doesn't it? And this picture was shown by Maurice Wilkins, who worked in her same lab, was shown to Watson and Crick without her knowing, sort of shown at sort of the separate meeting that they had had. And immediately, Watson and Crick will say, they saw that photo, and that photo alone allowed them to come up with the structure of DNA. It sort of was the moment that everything clicked, and they said, it's a double helix. And they were able to publish, and ultimately got the credit for sort of being the first to figure out the structure of DNA. Now, Rosalind Franklin wrote in her own laboratory notebook, double helix, question mark, sort of in the margin after she had gotten all these pictures herself. But she never published and never told anyone. And she died a few years later, actually never knowing that they had seen the photo 51. And she died she died from breast cancer, probably from the x-rays she was exposed to in her work. And therefore she was never able to share in the Nobel Prize that the other 3 men ended up sharing in. Now, I would say, how many other scientific discoveries have been delayed or never been made because of a failure of an institution, and in this case, the institution of science in the mid-1950s, to encourage and empower all the contributors? When you're a minority in an organization or an institution, it's easy to get excluded either implicitly or explicitly if the organization does not make efforts, these consistent and deliberate efforts, to promote inclusion. So even today, while women earn actually a little over 50% of the PhDs in biomedical science, they still hold a very small percentage of the sort of the top-ranked jobs called the principal investigators. And statistically, they tend to publish less and earn less grant money. And many different reasons have been put out there. But one consistent finding is that women scientists, young women scientists, tend to have less mentors, if any mentors, than their young male sort of counterparts. And that this ultimately kind of excludes them from a lot of networking opportunities with sort of the senior, more experienced scientists. And you say, well, whose job is it to fix this? Right? Well, ultimately, it's the leaders, right, in these organizations and institutions. In Dr. Beebe's book, there are many concrete leadership strategies that would help integrate sort of a very diverse workforce. And he doesn't always sort of put it in this context, but there's many things that would help. So he says, focus on continued growth and development of your associates. And certainly I would hope that this would include training or even just discussions about diversity and inclusion. Serve as a role model of character, right? Showing respect to every single member of your organization. Develop a culture that, on one hand, it can embrace change, and it focuses on performance and not conformance, right? How individuals are conforming to the whole group. And then being a good listener and an even better observer, right? So you can sort of identify problems and be proactive in finding solutions. Offering guidance and support. And I would argue you probably need to do this more for those employees that are in the minority, because they will face more challenges. This could be scheduling one-on-one meetings. I mean, he says very practical things, scheduling one-on-one meetings, being available to provide that support when it's needed. And of course, finally, being a mentor. And I would say maybe even intentionally setting up maybe another mentoring relationship if there's a better fit between the worker and somebody else there. But overall, it involves the deliberate and consistent effort that Dr. Beebe emphasized in that quote I shared with you. So the second challenge that can arise from the significant relational aspect of the knowledge worker can potentially create quite a burden on the leader. Dr. Beebe notes that one of the essential character traits needed in a leader is the ability, and he's talked about this, is the ability to balance a concern for the welfare of the employee with a need to achieve positive results. So there's this balance that one needs. In another part of the book, he describes it this way, that it's the hallmark of a self-differentiated leader, and he had those up on his slide. And a self-differentiated leader maintains an objective sense of what needs to happen while maintaining ongoing relationship with members of the group. And he even kind of terms this as the head and the heart of leadership. And certainly the pitfalls of a heartless head, a heartless mind, and a mindless heart, I mean, we definitely, it's easy to see those pitfalls, but we have to acknowledge that there's a tension here, that there can be a tension here. And perhaps these are the moments of greatest hardship on the leader. The ones that sort of keep them up at night, that prevent them from falling back asleep in the wee hours of the morning. This kind of heavy burden that even Rick talked about feeling. When you have the hard choices that seem imperfect, both of them. When you have to end projects that your employees have poured their heart and souls into, when financial realities make staffing cutbacks a hard necessity. I suppose this is where one needs to be focused on the institution's mission and the greater good, which Dr. Beebe talks a lot about. But we also have to recognize that it might not be good for certain individuals, and that's just a nature of some of those decisions. No doubt it is times like these that the character traits which undergird a lot of Dr. Beebe's formative leadership principles becomes especially important, right? Wisdom, diligence, fidelity, humility, mildness, generosity, happiness, temperance. These enable one to make good decisions, or at least to make the best decisions that you can. And no doubt there is a clever list in some leadership book giving guidelines for making these hard decisions. But I appreciate, actually, Dr. Beebe never includes any of these. Because inherently, the lists and guidelines feel very much grounded in the head, and it is sometimes the heart's wisdom that's harder to put into words. So, thanks.
Well, we have a time for a few questions. Those of you who need to leave, certainly, please go ahead. We will wrap up at 7, which is just a few minutes away, and we'll linger if you have questions that go beyond the scope of our time. Thank you for being here tonight. Man, I'm so glad we answered all your questions.
You're pretty bright.
You know, I am so glad that you came tonight. Well, I really appreciated both Rick and Eileen's remarks, and again, it's just been a great privilege to work with them, and also to have Mark join the team. Rick's emphasis on high emotional intelligence and the importance of moral courage, I just think I just appreciate you highlighting that so much. I do think that is such a key ingredient to sustainability and success. And as you're talking right at the end, Eileen, I was thinking about Aristotle's golden mean: do the right thing at the right time for the right reason in the right way. And the question, I mean, this is the conclusion of the Nicomachean Ethics, and what is it? It is, in your context, can you make good judgments? And he's trying to teach us, how do we develop the character so that we can actually make good judgments? And as old as Aristotle is, 4th century BC, he is still so relevant in terms of what we need from each of us is that capacity to really be wise in the context in which we serve. Yes.
I'll ask a question. You referenced many books. If you had to narrow it down to just one of your favorite books on leadership, what would it be?
Favorite book on leadership besides my own? No. I love The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. It's written in 1965. And here's what I love about Drucker. Your illusion of not being formulaic or lists, that's Drucker. Here, every time I went to class, he did not give you, here are the 10 things you should do. He taught you how to think through questions. And what the effective executive, it will not tell you, here are the 10 ways to be an effective executive. It's going to teach you how to think about the work in front of you, how to probe. He was incredibly masterful at asking questions that unlocked your understanding. You know, he has 5 questions. What is your business? Who is your customer? What does your customer consider value? What are your plans to achieve results? How will you, essentially, how can you tell if you've achieved what you plan to do? He used those to actually guide all of his consulting projects. And this is where I think questions can unlock our understanding, and we almost always just want the quick answer. And so that's where I recommend The Effective Executive. It's a wonderful read. He's a beautiful writer, and it will teach you how to think about really any challenge that you face. Yes?
Great talk, everyone. I'm an alum of Westmont.
All right.
And I look around the room and I see young future adults. I see wise elders here.
Life experienced elders.
Experienced
Yes.
elders. I'm a mother of a teen.
Okay.
I would love it if Westmont would offer a downtown series to our teen population in Santa Barbara. Because I see so much. Granted, my daughter goes to a public high school.
Yeah.
But our teens, I mean, Westmont is great, but not every kid is going to have the kind of mentors that Westmont has to offer. And the fact that this is free, and I know it's limited in space, but you're a great speaker. The provost, the professors are great speakers. If we could find a way in your new program to pop a circle for the teens.
No, I totally appreciate you expressing that, and that is actually part of what we're hoping to do. And we're in the process of doing a lot of internal work to try and expand our program offerings downtown. In fact, I mean, this is called Westmont Downtown, but we're talking about what would it mean for us to be downtown the same way that we go Westmont in San Francisco, Westmont in Istanbul, Westmont in Mexico, et cetera. And it includes, how could we actually bring leadership principles to bear on all of the nonprofit organizations in Santa Barbara? Because, per capita, there's more nonprofits in Santa Barbara than anywhere. And that would be beyond the scope of our academic initiatives. But I hadn't thought about the teen population. That would certainly be another interesting way in which we could be in the community really helping. Rick Iflin has just come as the director of our Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program. He is really, he's just fantastic at getting out and coordinating mentors. And he would be one that would be right in the front lines of helping us set up some sort of mentoring program with teens. But that's a direction we hadn't even thought about, but it's a great idea. And it is congruent with some of the directions we're hoping to be able to move over the next year or so. Yes?
Your remarks were directed to people in positions of leadership. Many people, most people aren't in those positions.
Yeah, it's a flaw of the book.
Is there a certain way or approach to applying the lessons of leadership to those who are not in those positions?
Well, the place that I would say, I think every single one of us can be an opinion leader within the organization. And one of the things that I've noticed of the people that are opinion leaders at Westmont, that they're the people that you absolutely have to have in stride with you as you try a new initiative. And these come at all levels of the college. Some of them may be department chairs, some of them may not. Some of them may have been here 5 years, some of them may have been here 25 years. But I think each one of us, if we understand the purposes of whatever organization we're a part of, and we can walk in broad alignment, not always specific alignment, broad alignment with the initiatives of the organization, the senior leadership always relies on the opinion leaders at every level of the organization. I certainly know I do. I mean, I look to our formal structure to start, but then I'm always interested in how is this playing itself out with people that don't have any formal leadership responsibilities within the college, but have great say when they're in closed meetings. And I think that you can look for those positions. And then I think many of the principles are actually transferable to any level at which we serve. And some of the stuff in the outline it's looking at, like here's one that I'll show you. Go to Principle 5, dealing with compatibility. Page 22, top of page 22, 6 key questions. Now this is about, I'm allegedly addressing this to, should you stay or should you go, like when I was deciding whether to stay at Spring Arbor or come to Westmont. This is actually something you could ask any time you're making any life impactful decision. And this is actually taken from a Quaker Catechism. 4 of the 6 principles are modifications of a Quaker Catechism that dealt with how do you know the will of God. Now I know, I trust you understand I'm a Christian, and so I come from a faith perspective, but there are so many principles from the Christian faith tradition that are transferable whether or not you're a follower of Christ or not, and really discerning direction in life is something where I think within my framework it works perfectly, but I think it works perfectly for anyone. Those questions are great questions to ask anytime you're making a major transition. Does the new opportunity fit your values as well as your current situation? Is it the right thing to do for the right reason? Is it timely? By this is meant is one situation closing down and another opening up? Do you have a growing sense you should move to the new position? How do your closest friends think and feel about the opportunity? In the Quaker Catechism, it actually says, do spirit-led trusted friends confirm the leading? Now, that wouldn't fly in a generic context. That's why they changed the wording and made it more transferable. And then do you have a growing passion for the new position? And by this, you can feel the lift. When you know you are supposed to go, you feel your energy shutting down for where you are, and you feel your imagination kick in to the place you're headed to. I was talking to Steve Sample about this. When he left University of Buffalo, he was convinced he'd never leave University of Buffalo. And he was at a football game. He said it wasn't even particularly cold, and he'd never lived in the warm, so moving to LA didn't register with him in terms of the mildness of the climate. And he said, I stayed at a football game thinking I'd never leave, and suddenly I just decided, the way in which they portrayed USC, I would love to be a part of that. And it activated his imagination in the sense of becoming the intellectual center of the Pacific Rim. And that's actually what triggered his interest in migrating from the University of Buffalo to USC, and he suddenly found himself just full of energy as he moved towards that vision of what he could do at SC. Now, when he came to SC, nobody thought of SC, everybody thought it was a good school. Nobody thought of it as a leading Research One university setting the stride. I grew up in the shadow of the University of Oregon in Eugene, so of course I will never think that. But I actually have huge respect for him and huge respect for what he did at USC, and I think we all do. He's there 19 years, and the success is phenomenal. But that's all to say, do you have passion for what you're moving towards? And I think all of us, at whatever level, you could be at a mid-level position, you could be at a low position, and if you feel your energy closing down where you are, and you feel your energy opening to a new opportunity, you should go with it. And you need that passion when the inconvenience and the setbacks come. I can tell you, when we came to California, and my beautiful wife is here, it's good to see you. She slipped in. We thought this was going to be so amazingly beneficial to my personal health. I remember us talking about, because when we lived in Orange County, I would jog 5 miles a night. Now, I didn't want to admit that in front of Bob because he's always like, you need to exercise more. Thought I'd be jogging a lot more. It would be less stressful because there's, not as many extension campuses. I mean, we had this whole litany of things of what life in Santa Barbara would be like. And of course, life in Santa Barbara is beautiful and lovely and charming. It is also a ton of hard work. I joke, but this is many of my half-truths come through jokes. When I was at Spring Arbor, I traveled a lot because almost every place I was going was nicer than the place we were. When you live in Santa Barbara, every time you leave, you go to a place that almost is never as nice as Santa Barbara. And so it lulls you into that insular feeling of Santa Barbara. The college doesn't grow, it doesn't benefit if I'm not spending enough time away to attract new resources to the college and spending enough time home to be sure everything's going well. And so those are ways in which I didn't anticipate that. I thought, as I came to Westmont, I was entering my 8th year as a president. As Westmont received me, I was in my first day of my first year as a president. And what I came to realize was the only thing you bring with you from one presidency to the next is knowledge of how to do the job. You really start over. And that was just part of the life learning. It's also why I want to retire from my job at Westmont. I really do not want to go through it again. And it's not that coming to Westmont was so hard. It's the reality of an organizational change at this level. It's challenging. And what I have found everywhere I've gone is that there have been great people that welcome us and great people that have taken care of us. And, we had a wonderful life in Spring Arbor, and we have a wonderful life here. And it just gives us a great sense of the goodness of God and the goodness of life as we go through life. Yes. Darlene.
A little bit with the ideals of this leadership position, and yet maybe running up against the wall of some organizations and subcultures, and
I think we're at the end of our time. No, no, you go ahead.
Okay, where there are remain really deep biases.
Yeah.
That have been there a long time, even in church organizations,
Right.
school organizations, where there's biases against equality, like ageism or gender, and it's just there. It's been there for a long time, and you have the ideals of the leadership that you can't.
Yeah, those are rugged. And my basic response is twofold. If it's an issue of justice and you have hosts within the organization that are willing to fight, then I think you can take it on. I often look at those, and I'm not saying this is the right way, this is just my preferred way. Matthew 10 is a great illustration to me of the story. Jesus sends his disciples out, they knock on the door, and the instruction is, if they invite you in, go in. If they don't, dust off your feet and keep going. And I often think that we sometimes miss the best expression of our gifts because we want to be at a place for whatever reason won't accept us, when there are plenty of other places that will actually celebrate our gifts and really let us flourish. And you have to weigh whether it's an issue that you want to take on with that organization, or should you migrate to an organization that will actually celebrate who you are, receive you, resource you, and allow you to flourish. I think we need to close, don't we? I'm so sorry I've gone 10 minutes long, but thank you so much and great to be with you. Well, thank you. Boy, so appreciate that.